Urban myths and stories of death notes have always been in circulation. It's said that if someone's name and cause of death is written down on paper, with the help of a higher, dark power, it can become a reality. But death notes don't just live within the safety of fictional worlds, they actually exist in the reality of Mexico's biggest music stars. Today, we're taking a deep dive into one of the most disturbing moments in music history. The night Chalino Sanchez, at the height of his career in 1992, was handed a death note live on stage. The note supposedly promised that when the show ended, so would his life. As the crowd screamed out his name, there's actually footage of the exact moment Chalino read that note and realized his fate. He was visibly alarmed. He wiped the sweat from his brow and weighed up his options. But he was a true showman, and the show must go on. But little did his audience know they were now watching his last ever performance. A few hours after receiving his death note, Chalino Sanchez would be kidnapped, and by morning, his dead body was discovered. This case was thrown back into the public eye in 2023 when a very public death note was displayed for a modern Mexican superstar. You might have heard of Peso Pluma. He's the most streamed artist in Mexico right now, and he was forced to cancel his show for fears of his own life. Chalino Sanchez's story is proof that the cartel mean what they threaten. Both Pluma and Sanchez shared the same genre of music, corridos and narco corridos, where the lyrics served to tell the often true stories of drug lords and traffickers. Chalino Sanchez really lived the lyrics he sang. Since a child, his life had been full of drug cartels, murder, and revenge. It's possible that he was born into a world where a death note had already been written, awaiting him. This is the story of Chalino Sanchez, the man faced with the promise of his own death live on stage. This series is intended for educational purposes, to memorialize victims and to amplify important conversations. All opinions stated are mine alone. Before we get into the case, I just want to thank our sponsor for making this episode possible, Casetify. Casetify's products have followed me through every phase of my adult life. I've lived in London, I've been a city girl for a good few years now, and now I'm about to move away with my boyfriend to a smaller town in the seaside, and I think it calls for a shake-up of my aesthetic. Consistently for years, I have used my phone case as a way to inject my own personal style with something different, something fresh. Because after all, your phone is probably one of the biggest accessories that you have. You take it everywhere, and if you're like me, you've always got it out. So you want it to look cute, right? I had so much fun scrolling through Casetify and choosing some new patterns for my new era. And girls, if you're upgrading to the iPhone 16, you better keep her protected. Look after her, dress her up, she deserves it. So I'll show you some of the cases that I chose for my phone makeover. Of course, I had to choose one that had beachy themes. This one with the shells on is too cute. I'm so excited to use it for my hot girl walks along the beach, listening to a podcast. She's a mermaid. This one is very cutesy, very demure. I'm sorry, I know we're kind of over that reference now, but it is. It's so soft girl. It makes me want to just leave the house with a bow in my hair, all fresh-faced, you know. And then there's this denim jean case. This is so unique. I've never seen one like this before, so I had to have it. I think it's so edgy, grungy, but still really cute. Having a new phone case just makes me want to show off my phone so much more. Maybe it doesn't do well for my screen time, but it does well for my mirror selfies. I'm always taking so many the week that I get a new phone case. And to make things even more fun, Casetify has a very special treat for my girlies. 15% off of your order. So if you want to twin with me and have a little phone case revamp, then you can go to casetify.com/Eleanor to shop my favorite direct Casetify products. And for a limited time only, you'll get 15% off of your order. So run, don't walk, run. Thanks again to Casetify for sponsoring another episode. We love you guys. Now, before we jump into the case, I want to give you a warning for some of the themes that we're going to be talking about. As with every episode, there are a lot of different sensitive themes, but especially including drugs, addiction, murder, and discussions of rape. So viewer discretion is advised. And now, with all that being said, let's jump into this video. The case of Chalino Sanchez, the singer who received a death threat on stage and was murdered that same night. Just last year, in September 2023, the internet woke up to pictures of a message hanging from a bridge in Tijuana. It was written in blood red paint on some white sheets. The warning was addressed to musician Peso Pluma, warning him that if he were to perform his upcoming concert in Tijuana, it would be his last show ever. The banner said, "This is for you, Peso Pluma. Refrain from presenting yourself on October 14th because it will be your last show due to your disrespectful loose tongue." It was signed off by a cartel, making it clear that they did not like Peso Pluma's lyrics. And instantly, his concert was cancelled because this wasn't just a threat, this was a promise. The cartel do not mess around. And this threat ignited a very real fear that history was about to repeat itself in Mexico. Peso Pluma had now received a death note, just like his idol Chalino Sanchez had over 30 years prior. Chalino, unlike Pluma, had ignored the threat and gone ahead with the show, only to be murdered that same night. 32 years prior, in May 1992, Chalino Sanchez was 7 years into his successful music career, and he was set to perform a hometown show in Culiacan. The show was caught on a wobbly camera recording, forever immortalizing the exact moment Chalino paused mid-performance to read a note that was handed to him by one of the audience members. It was his death note. A possible reason for Chalino's very elaborate murder could actually be traced back to his childhood. The night a very young Chalino decided to stalk someone to a house party. Chalino Sanchez was originally born Rosalino Sanchez Felix on the 30th of August 1960 into a very rural farming town in Sinaloa, Mexico. He was the youngest of 8 kids. So he was the baby of his family. And if you're as interested in like birth order theory as I am, this can probably tell you a lot about Chalino's character. The youngest children, especially of so many siblings, tend to be creative and outgoing and confident and rebellious and risk-taking. Sometimes they can also be a bit spoiled and a bit babied, depending on the family, but his music career totally checks out. As a child, Chalino decided that the name Rosalino that he was given at birth was too girly. It didn't suit him. He decided to unofficially rename himself Chalino instead. Chalino grew up in a very poor household. Their family had always struggled financially, but when he was 4 years old, his father passed away. And this had so many different effects. Of course, the grief, the sudden loss, the sadness, but also the family had lost their main breadwinner, so the financial struggles only got 10 times worse. Having lost his own dad at such a young age, Chalino spent his early childhood in search of father figures in other places. He would often follow the men around in his town and try to make friends with them, although many of them were linked with cartel activity. Chalino would learn many lessons from these men, and the one that was drilled into him the most was the importance of honor. And Sinaloa, where he lived, was a place where honor mattered, almost more than anything else. People would die or kill others to defend their honor, and at a young age, Chalino would soon feel the desperate duty to defend his own family's honor. The story goes that a close relative of Chalino's, believed to be his own sister, was kidnapped and raped by a local tough guy. Now, this story is a big question mark when it comes to researching this case, because Chalino's own family have actually denied that this ever happened. But Chalino's fans believe it to be true. Many are convinced not only did this happen, but it was also a major turning point in Chalino's early life. So Chalino's family might have done this for a reason. They might be trying to cover up the fact that this happened, because you have to remember that this happened in the late 60s, early 70s, a period of time when empathy for victims of sexual assault was almost non-existent. It definitely wasn't what it is today. In a situation as awful as being raped, it would then be the woman's reputation and her future that would be tarnished, as much as, sometimes even more than, the man that had raped her. And so maybe Chalino's family denied that this ever happened to his sister in order to protect her. This would allow her to continue on with her life and with her freedom without constantly being accused of being tarnished or destroying her family's honor by being raped. It's so disgusting and heartbreaking to think about, to think that they might even have to take these precautions to lie and to hide it away. After the alleged assault took place, the perpetrator supposedly left town, so he wasn't around anymore, but his friends still were. And one day, Chalino overheard one of the attacker's friends bragging and claiming that he helped to kidnap Chalino's sister and potentially even took part in the rape. Chalino was only around 12 years old at this point in time, overhearing this conversation, and he just saw red. Chalino was known to be quite hot-headed. He was always ready for an argument or a fight. He was always ready to defend himself. And so he swore, "The day I become a man, with the first gun I get, I will bury a bullet in that man's chest." And a few years later, in 1972, Chalino was still only 15 years old. He would follow that man to a party and carry out his deadly promise. The party was full of local people, dancing to music, cooking over an open flame, drinking, enjoying the night, all while Chalino watched and waited from the shadows. As the music lowered, the cooking flames died down, and guests began leaving, Chalino approached the man that he had stalked to the party. Without much of an interaction beforehand, he pulled a gun out of his pocket and shot 3 times into the man's chest, point blank. And now, laying dead, bleeding out on the stone-cold floor, was one of the men that supposedly partook in the rape of his sister. A man that Chalino had promised himself years ago that he would kill. He would take care of this man. And now he was dead. Little did Chalino know, in the years since he had vowed to kill him the first time, this man that he had just murdered had become a mafia boss. He was no longer just some horrible school kid committing crimes at parties. He was a big deal. And who knows, maybe they were after Chalino now. Somewhere in the chaos of the aftermath of the attack, Chalino managed to escape and run out into the night. And when he ran out, he just kept running. He was running through fields and up into the mountains. And once he was up there, he laid low for 2 weeks, knowing that the police would be investigating. I mean, the fucking mafia that this guy belonged to would probably be doing their own unofficial investigation. Chalino knew that he would be a wanted man at this point in time, so for 2 weeks he lived in the mountains, which is actually a relatively common hiding place for people on the run, as common as a situation like that is. Apparently there's quite a few shelters, you know, like camping trails and stuff, and there's a few villages that sell groceries, so he was able to survive up in the mountains for 2 weeks. And then once the coast was clear of all of the immediate frenzy, he fled to Tijuana. And by car, it takes almost 19 hours to drive to Tijuana, so I assume he was hitchhiking, or maybe he got someone to take him. But either way, once he got there, Chalino kept a low profile. He was apparently just selling drugs and working as a coyote. For those that don't know what a coyote is, it's not the animal, it's a job, well, an illegal job. These people are basically the enablers in illegal border crossing. For a price, they will take people across the border from Mexico to America, either by foot or hidden away in vehicles, which is a difficult and risky journey. But Chalino was used to difficult and risky at this point in time. So he was working in Tijuana. He was eventually joined by his closest brother, Armando. And when he arrived, the two of them started making plans to leave Mexico. I mean, Chalino couldn't really stay there. Even though he was currently safe, he knew that the mafia was going to be after him. So the brothers made a plan to escape to America and start a new life together. So in 1977, Chalino left Mexico and entered California, a place that he would now call home. He was just 20 years old, and he and his brother took undocumented jobs as farm workers. This kind of undocumented work would have these workers doing like abusive amounts of labor for very, very low pay. Within just a few months of getting these jobs, Chalino and Armando were sick. They just couldn't hack it anymore. It was an awful time. So within a year, they had quit working at the farm and began to work as drug traffickers and coyotes again. And for the next 7 years of Chalino's life, we don't really know what he was up to. Because a lot of his life was surrounded with crime and undocumented work and all of this kind of stuff, it means there was no like proper records of this man doing anything official. So piecing together a timeline on him has been pretty difficult. There's actually not that much detail of his life out there. But what we do know is that Chalino would meet his future wife, Marisela Vallejos. The two of them met on a rainy afternoon when Marisela stepped off a bus. She looked beautiful. Her hair was freshly done. She was wearing a lovely outfit. And within a few seconds, the rain had ruined it all. Chalino sat across the street in the comfort of his car watching all of this happen. And when he noticed Marisela, he was captured by her beauty and her need to be rescued in this moment. So Chalino revved his engine and put his foot on the accelerator, charging at her full speed. It terrified Marisela. Obviously, it would terrify anyone. This is the opposite of what she needed right now. He sped up real close to her, but he didn't hit her. That wasn't his intention. At the last second, he slammed his brakes on, which caused a whole other like wave splash of puddle to come and hit her in the face. Chalino thought this was a fun little flirty thing to do to this woman. He was proud of himself. I mean, I genuinely couldn't think of a worse introduction from a man ever. But anyway, once this had happened, Chalino offered her a lift home because she was soaking wet. And she decided that she would take this offer, even though she didn't really like Chalino at this point in time. He was an arse. You know, what he did was very arsey. So she decided, when she accepted this offer of a lift home, she decided she would twist it and teach this man a lesson for the reckless driving he had just displayed. She told Chalino Sanchez, "Get in the passenger seat, where you belong. I'm gonna drive myself home in your car." Obsessed. She's a queen. I love it. But it gets even better, right? So she gets in the driver's seat and she still has this burning desire to terrify this man as much as he had just scared her. So she began treating his car like a freaking go-kart. She was speeding, she was taking quick turns, taking turns a bit too late. She was really trying to scare him. She was doing everything she could to shake up this very arrogant man that had just tried to mess with her. But this actually had the complete opposite of the desired effect on Chalino. He couldn't help but stare at her, completely transfixed with this very confident, powerful woman in his driver's seat. He was completely smitten. This was like the first woman that had ever stepped into his life and taken control and dared to mess with him. Chalino and Marisela went on to get married in 1984. He was 24 years old and she was apparently 14. Now this is a very confusing and strange part of the case because this woman has recently come out in like recent years and said that her birth year is 1970, which would have made her 14 years old when she married Chalino. But people don't know if that's actually true. There was never any mention of like such a big age gap in this relationship up until she very recently said her birth year, like stated it. Some people don't believe her though, which I was quite taken aback by because I don't know, you're hearing it from the horse's mouth. She said that she was born in 1970. I would be inclined to believe her, But a lot of people don't, actually. There was never any mention of a large age gap in this relationship up until she came out and publicly said her birth year was 1970. I don't know if anyone's actually like properly checked on that. Some people think she might just be trying to sound younger than she is in her old age, but we don't know. There's genuinely never been any confirmation on how old she was at the time of the marriage, and Chalino has done a lot of criminal things that we've spoken about already in this video and we're going to continue to speak about, but I'm not entirely sure if marrying a child is one of them. I'm not going to try and defend him because, like I say, I have absolutely no idea. If he was 24 years old marrying a 14-year-old, that is grotesque. And there's also the element that both of them were undocumented at the time, so I guess her being underage, if she was 14 at the time they got married, it could have easily like slipped the system or something. I don't know, it seems a little bit dodgy, but Chalino fans seem to be okay with it, but they also seem to be okay with a lot of shit that he's done, so I don't know. But moving on, the two of them were married anyway, and they very quickly welcomed a son. Their family life was very happy, but around that same time, things started to fall apart outside of their married life. In December of 1984, Chalino's brother Armando, who was not only his brother but like his best friend as well, he went back to Tijuana and he was working for drug traffickers. I don't know, drug-related business is all we know. But during that trip, Armando was shot and killed in a drug deal gone wrong, which was so devastating for Chalino. I believe he actually went back to Tijuana in the aftermath of this. I'm not sure what there was to do over there, but I don't know, I guess that's kind of your instinct. If something horrible happens to someone you love and they're in a different place, you just want to get there. Even if there's nothing you can do to save them or to fix it, you just want to be there. So Chalino goes to Tijuana and actually gets arrested himself very quickly. The exact reasons for a lot of Chalino's arrests are quite vague, you know, just like general drug stuff and petty crime, and so we don't actually know what he was arrested for at this specific point. But it was in Tijuana, while he was sleeping on the cold, hard, dirty prison floor for 8 months, Chalino found his true life calling. He and the other inmates would kill time by chatting and telling stories and singing and playing this old beaten up guitar that one of them had. And after a while, Chalino began to fuse all of these different things. He would play the guitar and he would sing about someone else's life story. It was in prison where Chalino Sanchez began to write corridos. Corridos are Mexican songs about love, hardship, and crime. They're usually sung over a guitar or a band, often telling a story in first person. Chalino sang more specifically in the narco corrido genre, which is just a corrido with the word narco in front of it. It's all about drugs. It's all about big drug organizations, operations, drug trafficking. But writing these corridos came very naturally to Chalino because, well, the lyrics were real. They were from his life. He had lived this shit. The first corrido that he ever wrote was actually about his brother Armando's murder, and he vowed in that song that he would get revenge for him. Chalino's corridos were a hit with the other inmates, and a lot of them started to commission him to write them a song about their life story. And among these prisoners that were requesting songs from him were like high-level mafia and cartel leaders. This instantly put Chalino in the middle of some very powerful and dangerous circles. He now had the ceaseless responsibility to always stay on their good sides, lest something happened to him. Chalino had always been around music as he was growing up. It was a big part of his family life, but now that he was in prison, this was the first time he'd ever considered music in a career sense. While he was locked up, writing corridos and using his talent in that way had become his currency, and he wondered if that could continue outside of the prison cell. Eventually, after the end of his 8-month sentence, Chalino was released from prison and he traveled back to California to go back to his wife and his son. But now he had this whole new reputation, even in this other country. People had been talking about how good Chalino Sanchez's corridos were, and this news had gotten all the way back to the biggest narcos in California, who were now ready and waiting for him to return to be able to write their life story into a song. So Chalino made this his business. He started to record and write different songs. He would put them onto cassette tapes and deliver them to these big mafia bosses. In the early stages of this business venture, Chalino imagined that he would hire a singer to sing his lyrics on the songs for him. But the further into it he got, the more he realized that he was kind of the only guy equipped for the job. In order to sing these songs about gun-carrying cartel members that do all these awful, heinous things, you needed to have a strong confidence in your voice. And this is when Chalino's famous motto, "I don't sing, I bark," began. He believed that to be able to sing about such dangerous men, your voice needed bravery. So the way it began is the way it continued. Everything was done by Chalino himself, written, recorded, composed, and then sent out. By this point, he had recorded 15 different cassette tapes for 15 different clients. By now, Chalino had connected with a producer who was going to help him to level up these songs. It wasn't going to be a one-man job anymore. And they were trying to figure out a way to get Chalino's music out into the world and make him a star. So, as a next step, they decided to make 300 physical copies of new songs. Chalino went and handed these out all by himself at different places, car washes, flea markets, parking lots. And one of the things Chalino loved the most about this was that he was helping Mexicans that lived in California, just like he did, to reconnect with a genre that they'd heard growing up and might miss now that they don't live there anymore. He was helping other Mexicans to discover their love and their proudness for corridos. Chalino had breathed life back into the genre of corridos, and more specifically narco corridos. And he very quickly became a very distinctive person in the music industry, and he styled himself in such a way. He would wear suits and silk shirts, gold jewelry, the cowboy boots, the cowboy hat, obviously. And by 1989, he was 29 years old, and Chalino Sanchez was earning a proper living through creating his music. He would play shows at these small venues. He would get booked for parties and events. He had a long-running thing at a nightclub on Saturdays as well. But the most crazy thing we learned about his career is that he would sometimes do kids' parties. What? I'm hoping he had some PG versions of these narco corridos, because what the hell? Maybe it's more of a thing for the parents. Maybe it was a 2-year-old's birthday who's not gonna actually hear it, but the parents were like, should we get Chalino Sanchez to this thing? There was actually one little girl's birthday party that had to be shut down by the police because her parents had gotten Chalino Sanchez to come and perform in their back garden, and the whole neighborhood found out. And of course, everyone wanted to see Chalino Sanchez perform, so it incited almost a riot at this little girl's birthday party. Chalino's fame was growing insanely fast, and then one night in 1992, he was 31 years old, his music sales would go through the roof. In one of California's most famous clubs in Coachella, not the festival, the place, on January 24th, 1992, 400 people squished into this nightclub dance floor. Chalino was playing with his band, he was singing all the classics, and from the stage, he could see all of the audience in their different elements. There were couples on dates, there were families bringing their children, friends on a night out, there were likely cartel members sprinkled in the audience who really enjoyed hearing this authentic music that they could relate to. Chalino was so proud that his music could bring all these different types of people together under one roof to celebrate their culture. But on that particular night, the show wasn't going as any regular show would. There was this one guy in the audience that seemed very passionate about Chalino's music, and he had been shouting after every single song. He had shouted to Chalino to play this one specific request that he had. Every time this guy had requested a song, Chalino had ignored him. I mean, singers often have a predetermined set, and they don't, switch things in and out because someone shouted it from the audience. But this fella didn't stop asking for this song. He was getting closer and closer to the front of the stage. He was getting louder, more aggressive. He was demanding that Chalino Sanchez play this damn song. This guy was ruining everyone else's experience of this concert. So he decided after 20 minutes, he was just going to play the damn song so that he could move on with the concert. But in true Chalino style, no one was really going to get the upper hand on him. So instead, he starts playing this song, but singing completely different lyrics. It's a whole different story about a whole different person. And I mean, this guy in the audience had specifically requested this song because he wanted to hear about this one cartel leader. So Chalino starts singing about a different one. The guy in the audience was enraged and apparently very, very drunk. And he wasn't going to let Chalino get away with this, so he pushed his way right to the front of the stage and climbed up onto it. And within a split second, before anyone had realised what was going on, this man had pulled a gun out of his pocket, aimed it at Chalino, and shot twice. It hit him in the lungs. But Chalino rarely went anywhere without his own gun. That included performing on stage. And so despite being quite severely injured, he was down on the floor, covered in blood. Chalino managed to pull out his own gun and he fired back at this deranged fan, hitting him in the lower back. It hadn't immobilized him yet though, so the fan just jumped down off of the stage and tried to run out through the audience, and Chalino kept shooting at him. And at that point, he's risking the lives of his audience as well. He is literally shooting out into a big crowd of people, aiming for this one guy that's sprinting out of the door. At least 7 different audience members were injured during this shooting, and 1 person died. But in all of this commotion, the audience members had managed to keep a hold of this man that had incited all of this, and he was arrested by the police. Chalino spent a long time in hospital after that. I mean, he was shot in the lung. That could have killed him, right? And despite having quite recklessly shot into his own audience, Chalino didn't get any charges. But of course, the same could not be said for the heckler of the show, the man that had pulled out his gun first. He was identified as Eduardo Gallegos. And weirdly enough, up until recent years when Chalino had become a star, the two of them had had quite parallel lives. Eduardo had been working as an undocumented mechanic in California. Originally, like Chalino, he had been born in the state of Sinaloa to a poor family of 8 children. And just like Chalino, Eduardo had left his life in Mexico at quite a young age to go and make a different life for himself in California. And just like Chalino, he had met a wife out there, he had married and had kids. Only, unfortunately for Eduardo, this is where the similarities stopped. He wasn't a successful, rich musician like Chalino was. In fact, Eduardo's trajectory couldn't be more different from Chalino's. At this point in time, he was actually divorcing his wife, and it was a very messy one. Eduardo had little contact with his children because they were with his wife or his ex-wife. He was living in debt due to crippling drug and alcohol addiction. His life was honestly quite a mess. The whole day before the concert, Eduardo had been drinking, he'd apparently been doing hard drugs, and spent quite a bit of the day watching different chicken fights, which is quite random. Like, imagine having pre-drinks for a concert and watching a chicken fight as well. Eduardo was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. And he was responsible for all of the damage that was done that night. Of course, the attempted murder of Chalino, the death of the audience member, and all of the injured audience members. All of that responsibility was put on Eduardo. I'm not entirely sure if it was Chalino's bullets that hurt anyone or even killed that one audience member, but matter of fact is, all of it was put on Eduardo. And the weirdest thing of all of this is that for a long time, Eduardo never really gave a reason for why he went and did this. We'll tap more into that a little bit later. It's a theme throughout this video, don't you worry. But that same night that was the end of everything for Eduardo was surprisingly the night that made Chalino Sanchez. Chalino surviving an attempted murder in front of an audience and even shooting back at the perpetrator while he lay on the stage bleeding out. This story made him sound like a hero, and he was overnight news, gaining legendary status. While he sat in hospital recovering, his record sales skyrocketed. His bookings tripled in fees, and his songs found thousands of new listeners across both America and Mexico. Chalino was now officially the King of Corridos, because he was the real deal. I mean, clearly, he meant what he sang in his songs. He was willing to get out a gun when trouble was around. He wasn't a poser. This was evidence for the audience that he wasn't just singing about all these tough guys, he actually was one. About 2 months after this attack, Chalino was out of hospital and he was enjoying his new success. He received an incredible offer for a 3-night tour in his home state of Sinaloa. He would be offered $20,000 just to play 3 shows, and it seemed like a dream come true. I mean, he got to do a hometown show, which is probably one of the best experiences I imagine you can have as an artist, to be able to go back to the place where you came from and kind of show them how great you are now. Be able to play on those stages that you once stood in the audience and looked up at. I imagine that's such an incredible feeling. But everyone around Chalino was telling him not to take this deal, because his rise in popularity had only made his life in the criminal world all the more complicated. By this point in his career, he was 31 years old. He'd been writing these corridos, narco corridos, for years and years and years. So he had written about so many of these high-up drug lords and cartel members. And where in the beginning, in prison, when he first started writing these things, it would be very collaborative. Both him and the subject of the song would be writing about this life story together. But now it was Chalino in a studio, or maybe, I don't know if he did it in studios, but it was him and his producer making these songs without any approval from the people he was singing about, and you can imagine that probably pissed off a lot of people. And it's not like he was just making his own mixtapes and selling them in parking lots anymore. This music was going out to the world. He was performing it live. People would come and stand in the same room as him and listen to these lyrics. And I guess the nature of touring is quite scary, actually. I think about this quite a bit. I think because we covered the case of Christina Grimmie, who was an artist that was shot at her own show and killed. The idea of letting the whole entire world know what room you're gonna be in on what dates is very scary to me. Of course, concerts these days have so many safety measures that it feels less scary now. But imagine at the time, in the 90s, Chalino putting out this 3 tour dates back home in Mexico. Everyone there is going to see that and know where he's going to be on what nights. And if there are people that don't like his lyrics and don't like what he's about and want to fight him or even try to shoot him again the way that Eduardo had, they know exactly when and where to do it. With each piece he made, with each artwork he put out into the world, he was endangering himself more and more. He loved returning to Mexico, and he had actually done it quite a bit since he first left to go to California, so he wasn't scared about going back home by any means. Every time he'd gone back, he'd not really had any problems. People were excited to see him because, well, he was a hometown celeb. Especially a lot of the young kids where he was from really looked up to him because, well, he'd made something of himself. So like I say, he didn't fear just going back to visit home, but playing a show is different to just visiting, isn't it? In order to understand why all of Chalino's friends and family and associates were warning him against playing these hometown shows, let's set the scene of Sinaloa at the time and the way that it was being run in the run-up to Chalino's visit. It was a very, very harsh environment at the time. Crime rates were soaring. There was so much corruption in the police and in the government. Murder rates were soaring. Not to mention that in Sinaloa, almost every single person you come across could have some kind of connection to the cartel. They either know someone that's in it or someone that had been affected by the cartel in some way. It was that big. It was that powerful. It was that all-consuming. And Chalino's team were only getting more and more concerned for his safety in the run-up to these 3 hometown shows. And the reason for their concern was way more than just the place is generally dangerous and the police are corrupt. They were actually very worried that people were looking for Chalino in his hometown. Again, this is a little complicated pocket of this story, but While Chalino had been gone in America, he had been blamed for the murder of a hitman back home. I'm not entirely sure why this murder was pinned on Chalino and why a lot of people thought it was him, because he is largely believed to be innocent. But this hitman that was murdered, his name was Reen Escobar, and he was brutally murdered as well, like in the street. And for some reason, everyone in their hometown thought it was Chalino, or that Chalino had ordered a hit on this hitman. But Chalino had like hardly any connection to Reen Escobar, and he had no motive to want to kill him either. But you know, rumors can pick up a lot of weight sometimes, especially if it's in an echo chamber of a bunch of people that are thinking the same thing. And Reen Escobar's own brother believed that Chalino Sanchez was responsible for his brother's murder. And apparently this guy was mad. Like, he was going around the hometown bitching about Chalino and saying that he was going to get his revenge. And so this is why a lot of people were worried about him going back to his hometown, because it wasn't just like he had to look out for this one guy's brother. That guy's brother might have a bunch of friends and a bunch of associates. He might be part of a cartel or a mafia or something. So Chalino is being told by all of his associates, don't go back home, don't perform this show, this guy is probably going to come and try and kill you. But Chalino was way too proud to cancel a show over something that he insisted was untrue. To him, his honor and his reputation was everything. He had been raised like that since a boy, and he knew, or he maintained, that he was innocent of this hitman's death, and so why should he cower away as if he was responsible? He should stand up on that stage and sing as confidently as he would have, even if those rumors never existed, because that's all that mattered. He decided that he was going to put on these shows anyway. He needed to go out there and show his face and not let people's assumptions and whispers ruin his career and his business opportunities and his 20 grand that he was going to get from 3 shows. But the most important thing to him was that he was an innocent man with nothing to hide, and he needed to show everyone that he was a powerful force not to be reckoned with. And so the show would go on. In preparation for the increased safety risk on this tour, Chalino hired some armed bodyguards that would follow him around the whole tour. So the time of the tour approached. It was May 1992, Chalino was 31 years old, and he left his wife Maricela and his son and his young daughter, he had a daughter as well now, but he left them all in California to go on this very quick tour of his hometown. Upon his arrival in Sinaloa, Chalino did like a bit of a radio tour to promote the shows that were upcoming and try to sell a few more tickets. He told listeners that his very first performance would be on May 16th in the city of Culiacan. And when the fateful day arrives, it's a hot, humid night, the sort of humidity that makes your hair frizz and double in size. In a crowded nightclub, Chalino stood on that stage 7 years after beginning his career. He's all suited and booted up. He's got his cowboy hat on, his cowboy boots. He is so Chalino Sanchez. And he began his set to a roaring crowd. He was singing all the classics, all the songs, all the corridos that had made him famous. A camera begins to film the concert through this like shaky, blurry old lens, but you can see all of the energy in the crowd. They're going crazy for their local hero. And as the songs go on and the more and more people are dancing and singing, Chalino could feel the audience kind of getting closer and closer and pouring onto the stage. That can happen at smaller venues. It's just when everyone is so desperate to get as close to the person as they can and to feel that energy, like people were reaching out to him, trying to touch him. And then, with this mass of bodies that was moving closer and closer, an arm comes reaching out. The arm is anonymous. We still don't know who it belonged to, and you can't see in the video who it belonged to either. It was just such a sea of limbs that, yeah, the arm is completely anonymous, still to this day. But the arm did hand Chalino Sanchez a note. He opens the piece of paper, and for 7 seconds, he is reading the lettering on this tiny little note. And over those 7 seconds, the colour, the smile, and the life drain out of Chalino. As he lifts his free arm and wipes the sweat from his brow, the look on his face is specifically devastating. It's like his whole internal world just came crumbling down inside him behind his superstar exterior that is currently mid-performance on stage, and he needs to keep it together. So he pulls himself together as quickly as he can, but you can tell, especially now that we know what that note said and what it promised, you can tell that he is torn up, he is terrified. He looks around the room, trying to suppress this horrified look that you can just tell really wants to come out. It's almost like he's trying to make eye contact with people that he trusts and knows that he's safe with. But very quickly, he realizes that he is Chalino freaking Sanchez. He is on stage. All of these people have paid to come and sing his songs back to him, and he needs to keep it together. So he turns to his bandmate and he says, I don't sing, I bark, but the people like it. He dropped the note that he read onto the floor, and it was lost forever then. It must have just gone under people's feet, and that's it. And for that exact reason, we don't actually know what the note said. We don't have any specific wording. Still, to this day, no one knows what it said. But from what was about to happen after the concert ended, we can take a pretty accurate guess that it was promising his death. But despite receiving such a brutal threat in front of hundreds of eyes, Chalino didn't cower. He completed the show, the crowd roared, and he completed his first night of his hometown tour. After the show, him and all of his team and all of his friends were in such great spirits. They all left the concert venue together. It was Chalino, his brother, and 2 women that they were with, and they set off to an after party. A party that Chalino would never arrive at. Because while they were driving down the highway, about halfway to this party, Chalino's car was pulled over. Now, reports differ on this little section of the case, but the point is, a few cars came and pulled him over as if they were cops. Some sources say that they were dressed like cops, some say that they had cop cars and cop plates. Point is, people pulled him over pretending to be police. A man got out of one of these cars and came over to Chalino and all of his friends in the car and immediately started screaming at all of them to get out. Chalino first responded by telling the officer, I have money, assuming that this was just like a standard shakedown, which happened quite a lot at the time. The police, or unofficial police, would pull someone over, accuse them of something, and if you give them money, then it's all resolved and it can be forgotten. So Chalino's trying to do this. But the officer barks back at him, no, get out of the car. He made it very clear to the whole group that they were there for Chalino only. They didn't care about money, they didn't care about the rest of them, they wanted Chalino. So, not wanting anyone else to get hurt, and maybe even knowing something that no one else knew, Chalino Sanchez got out of the safety of his car by himself and willingly got into one of those cars that had just come and pulled him over. The rest of his entourage sat still in the car and just watched as Chalino was driven away. And they never saw him again. They had no idea where he was going. They had no idea who he was going with. They didn't even know that the police officer that just came over was even legitimate. And even if it was the real police, that still didn't mean Chalino was safe. I mean, remember, there was so much police and government corruption at that point in time that he could have been in just as much danger with officials. And whoever had taken Chalino Sanchez that night proved everyone's worst fears to be true. The next morning at 6 a.m., 2 farmers found Chalino Sanchez's body in a shallow canal of Highway 15. We think his body was found about an hour or so away from where he had just performed at the concert venue. And the way that his body was found made clear the harrowing ordeal that he must have gone through in those hours. His dead body was found still blindfolded. There were marks on his wrists where he had been tied up and he'd been fatally shot twice in the back of the head. He was just 31 years old, leaving behind a wife, an 8-year-old son, a 5-year-old daughter, and such a promising music career. His daughter was actually only a year older than Chalino was when he lost his father when he was young. And from the minute Chalino's body was found, theories and stories of what could have happened that night began to spread like wildfire. From the very start, those closest to Chalino suspected one obvious reason: Reen Escobar. Remember the hitman that everyone thought Chalino had murdered somehow? Well, it turns out he was wreaking havoc from beyond the grave, or maybe he had associates here still on Earth to carry out his revenge. After all, this is the reason that so many people were so worried about him going back and doing these shows in Sinaloa. People had seen this coming. Some rumors started to spread of some farmers that had apparently witnessed Chalino's murder firsthand. They said that they had seen him on his knees in a ditch, beaten, bleeding, and crying. Chalino's captorers were accusing him of murdering Reen Escobar, and they were taunting him, calling him a fame-hungry traitor, saying that he chose his music career over his responsibilities in the narco world. They said he was basically disrespecting all of the men that had put him on the map by commissioning corridos to begin with. They basically just thought he was too big for his boots, he was disrespectful, and he needed to be put in his place permanently. The killers went over to them and told these farmers to tell the papers that Chalino had knelt in that ditch, sobbing and begging for his life. They wanted the world to know that he wasn't the hard, tough guy that he presented himself to be to the world. They said that he was a coward at the very end, and that's how the world should remember him. People speculated that these kidnappers and murderers were people that knew Reen Escobar, and they were trying to not only avenge him, but also humiliate Chalino and discredit his reputation as a fearless outlaw. Because again, honor is everything, and especially when Chalino's not here to defend his honor anymore, they wanted to run his reputation into the ground. This theory actually has two different offshoots. People believe that it could have been Escobar's own friends and family and associates that did the actual killing, got their hands dirty. But another version of this theory is that Escobar's family paid for a hitman to take out the Chalino Sanchez. And this other theory, I don't believe it. I'll be so honest with you guys because, well, listen to the evidence that we have. So when this hitman had kidnapped him and taken him out to the middle of nowhere, he ordered Chalino to get out of the van and kneel down so that he could kill him. But before he did, the hitman supposedly said to Chalino Sanchez, "Sorry, I'm just here to do a job. I'm actually a fan of yours." To which Chalino apparently replied, "I get it. It's all good. Go for it. Pull the trigger." Honestly, guys, I don't believe it. I don't know, you can have your own opinions, of course, but I think it's just way too detailed of a back and forth, and neither of them would be able to tell us about it. Chalino is dead, and the hitman obviously wasn't going to come forward and be like, "Actually, this is true. I was the hitman." The rumor mill was really working overtime for this case, and I think this is just a big loaf of rumor. But moving on from the Reen Escobar theories, because his associates weren't the only ones that were suspected of carrying out this murder. And for this next theory, we're going to have to rewind 4 months back to that concert in Coachella, the night that Eduardo Gallegos shot Chalino on stage. The night that fast-tracked Chalino's fame and made him King of the Corridos, a hero, could have also made him a mortal enemy. The man that survived his gunshots. Rumors began circling that Eduardo was actually a failed hitman from 4 months ago. He was actually trying to kill Chalino, he had been paid to kill Chalino, and he just flopped it. I think a lot of people believe this theory because Eduardo was never given a reason as to why he wanted to kill Chalino that day or as to why he shot him that day. Maybe this is why. Maybe he didn't actually have any good reason to want to shoot Chalino. It was just because he'd been handed a big wad of cash and told to do it. Although a lot of people do still put Eduardo's actions down to his drunken stupor that he was in that night, and that is undeniable. He had been drinking all day and doing drugs. So I think that could be reason enough in itself as to why he whipped out a gun and decided to shoot the singer on stage that was ignoring his requests. That is a huge part of it as well. This really, really intoxicated man is asking for something and being ignored, and maybe that built enough fury inside him for him to act. Well, in 2012, 2 decades after Chalino's death, Eduardo finally spoke on the topic. In a parole hearing to determine his potential release, Eduardo said that he didn't get his gun out and get up onto the stage with the intention of shooting Chalino that day. He just wanted to hand him his gun. What? He said that he took his gun up there because he wanted Chalino to fire it apparently just like they do in Mexico. But Eduardo claims that this plan went wrong and he accidentally pulled the trigger whilst aiming at Chalino's chest. And didn't he shoot twice as well? How do you accidentally pull the trigger twice? It just doesn't really line up with witness statements, you know, of other people in the crowd saying that he was taunting Chalino and yelling and getting more and more angry as the show was going on. And he was definitely very drunk, very intoxicated. Everyone that was actually in that room at that show thinks that he acted out of nothing more than just intoxication and anger. Then, 10 years after that, so we're then in 2022, Eduardo gets another parole hearing, and he finally gave what's believed to be the most plausible reason for the attack. He told police that before the concert, he had just been sat there at a table having a drink, and Chalino, the Chalino Sanchez, walks past his table, and he's starstruck. So he calls him over, gets his attention, tells him that he's excited for the show, and requests that he play this one song, Eduardo's favourite song of Chalino's. And so he says that he will. But of course, when it came to the actual show, Chalino's not playing that song. And so Eduardo starts shouting it from the audience to, you know, remind him. But every song that happens is not the one that he requested. And so the more times he has to shout it to Chalino and then not get what he wants, he's getting angrier and angrier. In fact, he's offended. He takes it very personally, almost as if Chalino lied to him intentionally when they were at the bar and is now just mocking him on the stage, not doing his requests. As I said earlier on, I'm sure there's a lot more planning and structure that goes into a show. I mean, there definitely is these days, but probably even still then. He had a set list that all the band had agreed on. He can't just throw another song in the middle. But Eduardo, took it very personal that Chalino didn't do that. Eduardo said in this parole hearing that all his life he had been ignored by everyone. His marriage was failing, his kids didn't want to know him, he only ever worked proper grueling, undocumented jobs where he was abused, he was paid barely anything, he'd never had chance to grow a career, his life just sucked. Honestly. Of course, police have looked into the idea that he could have been a hitman or he could have been acting on behalf of cartels, but Eduardo didn't really have any links to any of that world. It really did just seem like he was at breaking point with his life. He was already very mentally unstable, didn't have his wife and kids anymore, got very, very drunk, very intoxicated, and then got mad at this singer, and that was his final straw. He was made to feel like a loser in front of the rest of the concert crowd, and so he shot Chalino. Of course, it can't have been Eduardo that did eventually kill Chalino 4 months later because Eduardo was in prison. But some people do think that he was a first attempt at a hitman, at an assassination. So could the actual murder have been a successful second attempt from someone else? And so it begs the question, who else would have Chalino Sanchez on their hit list? Well, one theory is that it could be revenge from when a very young 15-year-old Chalino shot and killed that mafia boss at a house party. Although he was defending his sister and avenging her for the attack that supposedly took place, he still killed a man. And there's going to be a lot of people that don't like that. That event had him running from the consequences of his actions for the rest of his life. He knew that people would be mad at him in his hometown. That's why he ran up into the mountains. So who knows, maybe now by the time that he has come back and he's advertised these hometown shows, maybe it was finally time for them to get a long-awaited revenge. People think this theory doesn't quite add up though, because like I said, Chalino had gone back to Sinaloa several times since he first moved away and he'd never really had an issue. If the associates of this mafia boss wanted to exact revenge on Chalino, surely they would have done it before now. Like, they'd had plenty of opportunities over the years. But I guess maybe it had to do with the fact that he was famous now. Maybe that pissed them off. You know, this person that had managed to get away and flee the country after murdering one of their friends is now a superstar coming back to town. Maybe it made all of those men angry that the whole world seems to love this guy that had murdered their friend when they were teenagers. So maybe they waited until they got exact confirmation, an announcement, in fact, of when Chalino was going to be back in town, and they planned their belated revenge. We have another theory that Chalino's murder could have been done with official support, which means that someone high up either wanted or allowed Chalino to be killed. Now, the reason that this is a theory is because American police were working on the case of Chalino's attempted murder. You know, the Eduardo shooting took place in Coachella, so it was American police working on it. And they would get in contact with Mexican police quite often to ask things and, you know, ask more things, I guess. And months and months and months down the line, they got in contact with the Mexican authorities and asked if they could have a copy of Chalino Sanchez's death certificate. And they said, no, you can't. I think there's a bit more to this than we've been able to uncover, but the American authorities thought that this was very weird. An investigator told the media there was potentially and apparently some official involvement in the death of Chalino Sanchez, which caused the Sinaloan authorities' lack of cooperation with American officials investigating his death, and could be an explanation. I don't know, the fact that the authorities were blocking people from investigating Chalino's death is a bit suspicious to me. And especially considering it had been an alleged state police officer that had pulled Chalino over and then made him get in the car and drive away with them. Like, maybe the theory is seeming a little bit likely, I don't know. Sinaloa's minister even did an interview with the press where she blamed Chalino for his own death. She seemed just very angry at him without an ounce of sympathy at all. It kind of seemed like she was on the cartel's payroll. Because bear in mind, Chalino Sanchez is a superstar from her state, and you would think that a minister would be proud to boast such a successful native. I don't know, it gives me a weird vibe for sure. To this day, police are still refusing to release Chalino's case files, which I think could point to just more potential government and police corruption. Because why go to such great lengths to hide information if there's nothing to hide? So who could the Sinaloan authorities be working with or covering up for? And why? Well, the cartel kind of works on a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours basis. If you can offer them something, then they'll let you in on a bit of that drug money and their protection. Allegedly, a lot of people in public positions of power have deals with the cartel or the mafia or whatever, because these can be very mutually beneficial relationships. The public official gets a lot of protection from the mafia. They can allegedly help to like rig votes. They can of course get rid of anyone that the person might want, and they can make it look like an accident. They can do so much for these public officials, and in return, the public officials will turn a blind eye to what the mafia are doing. They will ensure that their criminal activities do not get investigated, and that's where a lot of corruption comes from, doesn't it? It's all making sense now. But if the authorities are being controlled by someone, it's hard to know who, because Chalino Sanchez wrote so many corridos, so many narco corridos, and it really could be like any of the men that he wrote about, because they're all dangerous, they're all powerful, they're all violent. All of this could have just been payback for a bad lyric, like a verse that one of these men didn't like. Seeking revenge for unfavorable lyrics is actually a very real thing in the narco corrido genre, even up until today. And it was for this exact reason that 25-year-old Peso Pluma was warned with a death note only last year in 2023. If you don't already know who Peso Pluma is, to give you an indication of how famous this man is, he only released his first song in 2020, and now he is Mexico's most streamed artist. His music varies between rap, reggaeton, authentic corridos, but more often than not, he smushes all three of those things together. But Peso Pluma is a narco corrido singer first. His verses sing about drug lords, cartels, crime, and his music videos don't try to hide it either. And it was these sorts of lyrics that got him served with a public death note across a bridge in Tijuana. It was a direct message for him from the Tijuana cartel, and it was all because they were offended by one of his lyrics. The bit that they didn't like was basically where Peso Pluma was singing the praises of an old drug lord, saying that they were good to the people of the city, but he had since retired or something. And when the new cartel that was running that city heard this song from Peso Pluma, they kind of took it as Peso Pluma saying that the old drug lord was better. He ran the city better. He hadn't even said a word about the new people that were running it. It was nothing to do with them. It was just a comment on the old guy that run it. But they took it so personally. It's actually giving that meme, you know, that you can't say I like pancakes because some bitch is gonna come in like, so you hate waffles? It's like, no, those are two completely separate statements. And he'd never made a statement on the new people running it. But still, they were pissed. And so they decided to publicly confront Peso Pluma with a big banner on a bridge. And luckily, authorities acted very quickly. They ended up arresting a guy who was putting up a second banner in a different part of the city. He was working on behalf of the cartel. That's how we know exactly where these warnings have come from. He was arrested. The banner that he was putting up was practically the same as the other one. But maybe this modern tale of death notes and angry drug lords can shed some light on Chalino Sanchez's murder. Maybe it could have just been over some song lyrics. Maybe Chalino had pissed off the wrong person, a person who had the power to see him dead. And when he wrote so many songs about so many different drug lords, like I say, it's very hard to pinpoint who it could have been. Chalino's band have a theory that the whole Sinaloan tour, you know, the 3-day hometown tour, they think it was just bait. It was a trap to get Chalino back into the city so that these people back at home could get him. Maybe some drug lord paid to have these concerts put on, give Chalino a reason to want to come and show his face. But the whole time, as Chalino was counting down the days of tour, a drug lord was counting down the days until he finally had Chalino Sanchez dead. Maybe even Chalino himself could have known it was a trap, but he was a very proud man. He lived by his honor and his word, and he was never going to cower from a trap or from a threat. He had promised a 3-show tour in his hometown and 3 shows he was gonna give. But in the wake of his death, Chalino left behind a young family and a huge impact on the rise of the narco corrido genre. In 2002, Chalino's son, Aiden Sanchez, actually grew up to be a musician, and he paid homage to his father on a mixtape where he mixed both of their vocals so that it sounded like they were singing together. Sadly, 2 years after that, in 2004, Aiden died in a car accident, a month before his 20th birthday. But the strangest part is, the car crash that he died in was in Sinaloa, the same place that his father died. And remember, Aiden was born and lived his whole life in California. It just seems like too much of a coincidence that he was back in his hometown just like his dad was, and they were both killed. But cue the rumor mill, the people of Sinaloa actually have their own theories, and they believe that Aiden was shot, murdered. There are rumors that his body had bullet wounds, but his autopsy was kind of covered up. It was a secretive job, and his case files are never going to be released, just like his father's. And so for that reason, just like his father's murder, I doubt we'll ever have 100% accurate information. While Chalino's concert in Sinaloa in May 1992 was his last in body, he did make it back to the stage at Coachella one more time, in spirit this time. On Coachella Festival's main stage in July 2024, Peso Pluma paid tribute to his idol, plastering Chalino's picture on the board behind him as he made his entrance. He was clearly so proud to not only share a connection with Chalino Sanchez in music, but also now a connection in the shared experience of death notes. As you guys know, we like to call attention to a charity towards the end of my videos, and today I'd like to bring attention to the undocumented people that make the very scary journey across the Mexican-US border, specifically children. To have to go through a legal system that determines your future is terrifying at any age, but for a child, it's traumatizing. KIND is a charity that stands for Kids in Need of Defense. They protect unaccompanied children who enter the US immigration system alone from Mexico. They ensure that no child appears in court without an attorney, and they continue to support the child, seeing that they are looked after and not neglected by the system. So if you'd like to find out more information, and please do consider donating, there's a link to KIND down below in the description of this episode. Or you can go to supportkind.org. In all honesty, Chalino Sanchez's murder seems like a case that is not allowed to be solved, leaving us to speculate and theorize the most likely cause. So if you guys have any thoughts or theories of your own on today's case, please do share them in the comments. Me and the team love reading the comments on every upload, and I'm really interested to hear the wider conversation of this one. But thank you so much for watching this episode. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed, please leave a thumbs up down below or leave a comment. If you engage with this video somehow, it tells YouTube that you like it, and then they'll be nice to us. Woo! And I want to say thank you again to Case2Fi for sponsoring this video. I'm so excited about my new phone cases, so if you want to twin with me and do a little aesthetic revamp for a new era, then go to case2fi.com/Eleanor, and they're even giving you guys 15% off. Woo! But that 15% off discount is for a limited time only, so go girls, go now! And there are so many cute cases on there at the moment, so good luck trying to narrow it down. Thanks again to Case2Fi for sponsoring this episode. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to watch another one, there'll be one on screen for you to click on right now. Or you should subscribe to this channel, I suggest. Click the little circle with my face in and you can subscribe, and you can put the bell notification on so you never miss when we upload a video, because I'm going to be here again very soon, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!